Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about FinOps, and I hope you all are excited. All right, a little bit about us first. So my name is Ann Johnston. I lead Capital One's Cloud Cost and Engagement team at Capital One. What our mission is to maximize the value that we get from the cloud.
I'm Patrick Barch. I lead product management for Capital One Slingshot. Slingshot is the first offering to come out of Capital One Software, which is a new enterprise B2B SaaS division within Capital One, focused on bringing our cloud and data management products to market.
I'm going to give this to you in a second, but before we do that, I think we need to address like an elephant in the room here.
What?
Looking at your picture and looking at you, what has happened to your hair?
What? Are we really doing this here?
I mean, no time like the present.
Okay, quick story, y'all. I'm going through a midlife crisis. And rather than buy a boat, buy a sports car, or God help me, NFTs, I decided to grow my hair out. Before this, super simple. Go to the barber, 2 on the sides and back, a little bit longer up top, high and tight. And those were the good old days, you know, getting ready in the morning. I could use whatever product was in the shower, shampoo, conditioner, soap, whatever's in that purple bottle, like whatever, it doesn't matter. Styling this thing, you know, whatever's on the shelf, muss it up a little bit, good to go for the day. Now, I have to use the fancy shampoo. Now I have to use the fancy conditioner. And like styling this thing, I go to Target to look at products. Do I want the combing cream? Do I want the all-in-one? Do I want the one with shea butter or avocado? Like I'm doing my hair, not going to breakfast. And then you get to the checkout counter and they go, that'll be $100, sir. And it's like, what? So what used to be this like super simple, straightforward activity has now become this overly complex mess with all of these products I don't understand the costs of.
And I can relate. But that is actually very similar with FinOps and how we thought about data centers. We had to change how we thought about the cloud and financial management.
Right on. Let's hit it. All right, folks. Big agenda. We're going to start with a little bit about Capital One and who we are. Ann's going to introduce FinOps at a high level. And then I'm going to do a deep dive into a particularly tricky topic around FinOps for data. Ann will close us out with how these concepts apply to the full stack, and then we'll take some questions at the end. First, a couple things about Capital One that you may not already know. From our first founding days in 1994, from our first credit card, from our first customer, we've always recognized the power of data and technology to enable even big companies to be innovative and create differentiated experiences for our customers. Technology is central to what we do as a business. We leverage real-time data at scale, AI, machine learning, to really make a difference in the lives of everybody that's a customer. And over the last many years, we've built out a really strong engineering organization of about 12,000 people, 85% of which are actually in engineering functions. Now, our tech journey really started about 10 years ago when we took a hard look and embraced modern ways of building and developing software, starting with embracing APIs, microservices, open source. Then back in 2016, we declared that we were going to go all in on the public cloud and shut down our data centers. Over the next several years, we completed that journey, and along the way, we had to build out a number of products and platforms to enable us to operate in the cloud at scale as a well-managed, highly regulated business. As we've shared this story, people have asked us, hey, what you're doing sounds like what we want to do. Would you consider making some of those tools available? And so as a natural extension of our tech transformation, in 2022, we actually brought our first product to market, Capital One Slingshot. Over to you.
Thank you. All right, before we get into the heart of what FinOps is, by a show of hands, how many in this audience spend a lot of money on the cloud? Now, I know, okay, everybody. I was going to say a lot is relevant, but a lot is a lot. How many in the audience feel like you're spending too much money on the cloud? All right, almost everyone. And then, how many of you think that FinOps is your answer to spending less in the cloud? Not quite as, but some, okay. All right, before we answer that question, let's all first align on what FinOps is. So the FinOps Foundation has helped us with the definition about FinOps. It's an evolving cloud financial management discipline and cultural practice that enables organizations to get maximum business value by helping engineering, finance, technology, and business teams to collaborate on data-driven spending decisions. So a few things about this definition before we start. There's one thing that's missing. It's not about saving money. But there are a few other really interesting parts about this definition. The first one, right up front, is evolving. FinOps is fairly young. It started with the migrations to the cloud. So we're still in our early days of FinOps and continuing to mature. The next part that I find interesting is cultural practice. Now, in this presentation, we're going to talk a lot about technology and what we do with technology in order to enable FinOps. But it is just as much about our culture as it is technology. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And the other piece of this that's super interesting is around maximum business value. What that means is it's aligning your tech teams, your finance teams, your business teams, your product teams, all together to agree on what they value their cloud workloads to be from a financial standpoint. So it's about bringing all of these groups together. So that's what FinOps is at a high level. And at Capital One, we think about it in 4 pillars. The first is people. Now, at the beginning, Patrick mentioned we have 12,000 associates in our technology organization. Most of those are in engineering functions. That is almost 12,000 spend agents. That is why we need a structured FinOps program, because that can get a little bit chaotic, and it needs to be controlled. Architecture and standards. Many of you, if you're not familiar with FinOps, probably are familiar with fixing defects. And if so, you're also familiar that once those defects go to production and you have to fix them there, it's really expensive to do that. It's much easier to fix them early in the development lifecycle. FinOps is the same way. If you build it into your architecture, if you build it into your standards, then you don't have to do the cost remediation later in production. You end up spending less if you implement good FinOps practices early in the development lifecycle. Tooling. Tooling is at the heart of FinOps. It's knowing what you're spending, knowing where you have opportunity to make change, and we're going to talk a lot about tooling in this presentation. And then finally, analytics and modeling. We think about this as anomaly detection, what-if scenarios. All of these models and analytics that we put together turn into strategy that we implement at scale, and this helps us do this across Capital One as a whole. Now, the FinOps Foundation has equipped us with a set of domains, and we took these domains and thought about how do these relate to Capital One, and what should we do about them? So I'm going to cover a few of them here. And the first is understand cloud usage and cost. How many in this audience have looked at your AWS bill before? Okay, you know that bill is really complicated. It means something to AWS, but doesn't necessarily mean something specific to you. We take all that data and massage that into something that means something to us as Capital One. We have our concepts of what a division, what an application is, and we are able to put together the allocations so that it means something to our engineering teams. Cloud rate optimization. This is by far our biggest lever for savings in the cloud. It's also very complicated, and that's probably what's complicating your cloud bills in the first place. But it's looking at savings plans, reserved instances, spot, and many others that bring your rate down to enable your teams to not necessarily focus so much on the rate, but focus on building and get the lowest cost for what they're building. We handle this centrally, so all of our engineers are not trying to modify their rates on the fly. We handle it centrally since we have that expertise. And then the last one I'll touch on here is around organizational alignment. Now, we talked at the beginning with the FinOps definition. It's about bringing various different parts of the organization together to talk in a common language so that everyone understands what that spend is, why they are spending it, and if they place the same value on that spend as the dollars and cents say. So it's bringing together tech, finance, product, and business teams to have those conversations and creating a uniform language for how we think about cloud costs. So that's a little bit about how we think about FinOps. We think about it as really a toolbox. We think about it as, sometimes you need that screwdriver. Sometimes you need that wrench. We pull them out at different times. Sometimes you need that hammer, although we try really hard to stay away from using that hammer because it doesn't always go great. But it's in the toolbox, and depending on the situation, we pull out the right tool for the right purpose and get the job done. So that's a good overview of how we do it at Capital One. Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about the data?
Sure, thanks. I'm going to start by unpacking the problem a little bit. And this has been said ad nauseum, but I'm going to say it again. The structural challenge that we're all facing here is that technology spend has moved from a capital expense to an operating expense. Cloud costs are now variable. You used to be able to sit down with your business once a year, plan out your capacity, and go buy some boxes. Now you have as much capacity as you want. Just pay for what you use. You can use bulk buying, pre-purchasing, discounts to sort of drive some predictability and lower your cost a bit. But that can actually create challenges on the back end for your finance teams when they have to apportion out those discounts proportionally to different lines of business. And so because costs are variable, you need new operational processes to review them more often. You can't get by with slow manual data pulls anymore, custom spreadsheets. We're past those days. And so there's all of this new activity that you have to do on an ongoing basis to reconcile your bill every month. That forces more collaboration between teams that don't always have the same motivation. Your finance team is going to push you to spend less. Your business team is going to push you to increase the speed of your workload and improve their customer experience. Your engineering team is going to get caught somewhere in the middle. So what do? Well, let's start with our users. There are a ton of personas floating around out there that you could design for with FinOps. But it's not practical or cost effective to do that. And so for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to simplify down to 3 key user groups. So you've got your finance team, like your financial planning and analysis leader. You've got a platform lead sitting in technology. And then maybe you've got a business person. Could be a finance business person or a tech business person. I'm going to focus through the lens of a business application engineering leader responsible for building customer experiences. Now, pop quiz, who's responsible for managing cloud spend? It's an easy quiz. The answer's right there. It's all of them. All of these groups feel the pain, the challenge of this new model, because what the cloud has created is really a shared accountability model. And nowhere is that shared accountability model felt more acutely than in your shared platforms, your shared data environments. At Capital One, we are a big bank. We operate fully in the cloud. We have a big cloud bill. Around 40% of that bill goes towards our enterprise data environments, our model platform, our data lake, Snowflake, Databricks, ingestion services, governance services. And while there's a ton of different products out there that let you see how much you're spending on EC2 or S3 or some other service, nothing really exists that helps you understand or gives you transparency into what's running on those shared platforms from a data and workload standpoint so that you can proportionally allocate costs to different lines of business. This FinOps for data concept doesn't really exist. And so how do you create this shared accountability model? Well, let's look at the needs of each of our different personas. We'll start with our finance person. For them, it's all about predictability. Help your finance team provide good guidance to the business and tech teams on how much they can invest in business priorities, in new features, and new headcount. If you can't predict how much you're going to spend on the cloud, you have to leave this additional buffer of variability in all of your projections, and that reduces the amount that you can spend on those more fun things. For the tech person, it's all about transparency, and transparency on two fronts. Where is my spend going, and where are my problems? Our tech leaders have asked us to make it really easy for them to create a total cost of ownership model for their data throughout its life cycle. And it's like, oh, total cost of ownership model for data. Yeah, because it's reasonably easy to allocate storage spend and some compute spend to different business entities, but that's not the total spend on data. There's cost to scan the data, there's cost to monitor data quality, there's cost to tokenize and protect that data. And if you could create that holistic picture of your data spend, you could drive down to a unit cost of your data, which would really help with projection and forecasting. So second, your tech teams want to know where their issues are. Where is my infrastructure not the right size? Where are my workloads not optimized? And where am I wasting money on storage? But they don't want to pour through log tables to find this information. The cloud is a big place. Just point them to hotspots. For your business teams, it's all about clarity. Just tell me how much my new process is going to cost so that I know how much to budget. I feel their pain on this front because they're used to a world where they can make guesses at the number of customers that will sign up for a new product or a new service and then use those estimates to predict how much they need to invest in operations and customer support and call centers, things like that. You can't do that in the cloud. Oops. And finally, for the business team, importantly, when they do have opportunities for optimization, help them understand the impact of applying that optimization to their process. You don't want to make some kind of change to their code, to their infrastructure, and impact a business process or a customer experience in a way that they did not expect. So because this is a shared problem, they all have shared goals, the capabilities required to serve each of these groups are generally the same. But this really is an integrated problem that each one of these groups comes at from a different lens. We had a scenario not too long ago with our enterprise model platform. So the platform itself is owned by our technology team, but the compute is not provisioned by the tech team. The compute is provisioned by the business teams on their own as they build and train their model. And we had somebody go in, provision what they thought was a reasonable amount of compute, turned out to not be a reasonable amount of compute. They trained their model on it, and it was a significant problem. We didn't know about this problem until our finance person got the bill at the end of the month. Now, imagine a world where that same business person could still provision their own infrastructure because that's pretty cool. You don't want to create too many bottlenecks, but they do it within a set of guardrails. Imagine a world where you're not finding out about these problems when you get your bill, but you're finding out about them more proactively. Well, that's what we did, and we built some of those capabilities for ourselves, and now we're bringing them to market through our Slingshot product. But when you're selecting tools, when you're figuring out how to empower your teams, don't just over-index on the shiny new feature, the pretty UI. Really think through how this tool will enable you to operationalize this shared accountability model and drive more collaboration. Okay, I'm going to spend the next couple slides here walking through a hypothetical day in the life of each one of these persona groups. I'm going to do it through the lens of Capital One anecdotes in our Slingshot product that's really focused on optimizing your Snowflake spend, but the principles that I'll talk about really apply to any cloud data platform. So often, the first time you know about a problem is when you get your bill at the end of the month. Business users don't always shoot up a flare before they turn on a new process or run a new workload. I don't know too many analysts and scientists that ask for permission before building out the new insight. And so as a finance person, you're constantly bringing bad news and bad surprises back to your teams. What's worked for us and what's worked for our customers is more proactive notifications around events like contract consumption and cost spikes. And these are particularly effective in lower dev and QA environments where there's not a lot of governance and you don't have somebody watching over those environments day after day. But notifications aren't enough. The finance team will need additional information to know who to go chase in the business. And so you need to break your spend down so they can do that. We break our data spend down by business unit, by environment, by workload type, whether it's ad hoc query, ETL, reporting. And yeah, those three. We have customers that use other categories. Some allocate spend to their own customer. Some allocate spend to cost center. Some allocate spend to project. The key is picking a cost allocation model that will work for both financial reporting purposes as well as, we'll get to this in a second, issue remediation purposes. Now, your finance team is probably great at being a squeaky wheel, but they probably don't have the expertise to either understand or fix the problem. And so we also have to send different other relevant notifications. In this example, we're alerting a platform lead that a specific warehouse incurred a cost spike of about 200% week over week. From there, the platform lead can dive into the data. In Snowflake's case, it's query runtimes, query volumes, idleness, spillage. We also provide them a list of recommendations where we've observed that their Snowflake warehouse, their Snowflake compute, is not the right size. Remember, there's misaligned incentives here. Your business teams are almost always going to over-index on getting their job done quicker, and you may not want that. And so what we do and what we encourage our customers to do is use all of this information to facilitate an informed conversation about whether the return that they're seeing on that spend is commensurate with the spend itself. So the cloud data platforms really give you two levers to manage spend. One we just talked about is right-sizing your infrastructure. The second is optimizing your workloads. In the cloud data environment, you now need to worry about inefficient queries and inefficient users driving up your bill. And so what we do, what our customers do, is they examine the costliest users and the costliest queries to look for patterns. Now, the term costliest here can be a little tricky by platform. In Snowflake, for example, they give you a unique query ID every time you run a query, regardless of whether the text is exactly the same as something you've run before. And so to understand the true cost of a workload, you have to identify all the instances where the same code has been run or a similar enough where the intent is the same, sum all of that up, and then that will enable you to understand where your leverage is. Does it make more sense to optimize a frequently running smaller query, or does it make sense to go spend the time and rewrite this massive behemoth? Okay, we identified a ton of problems. Now we have to go fix them. And frankly, this is where a lot of the tools on the market today fell a little short, and is one of the reasons why we had to build our own. Most companies have at least some of their infrastructure and workloads that are owned by a central engineering team. And that team can go in, make necessary changes all on their own, easy peasy. But a lot of this is owned by the business. The infrastructure runs critical business processes. The business owns their own workloads. And business teams don't take kindly to you messing with their compute and messing with their queries without telling them. And so what we're seeing is that generally, the business has the final say on whether they're going to implement one of these recommendations or not. And so our job then becomes taking them through this journey of understanding a problem, understanding the impact that fixing the problem is going to have on their process, and helping them remediate that problem as quickly as possible. So what are you seeing here? Up on the left, this is a screenshot of our scheduling recommendations feature. We enable teams to provision compute based on observed demand in the system. So in periods of high demand, provision more compute. Periods of low demand, provision less. Turn it off when you expect no jobs if you choose. Now, why do we do it this way rather than serverless or letting the user pick their size or auto-scaling? One is usability. So do you trust all of your users to select the optimal sized compute environment for their queries? I don't. They're just going to pick the biggest thing they have access to because they want their job to run fast. We typically break workloads and manage our compute environments by the type of job it is. And so our user just has to know whether they're running a ETL job, a ad hoc query or reporting job. They select the appropriate warehouse and the system handles the rest. Our business teams can review all of these recommendations for all of the infrastructure that they own. And then to actually implement the fix, they just complete a managed workflow in the tool. There's no emailing a DBA, emailing an engineer to actually go into the system and make a change. They just complete this workflow, and Slingshot, the tool, will update Snowflake on their behalf. On the right, you're seeing our Query Advisor tool. Capital One built a proprietary SQL optimization solution. Our business teams use it to go through that list of costly queries that I showed before, and in just a few clicks, they can get recommendations on how to improve them. We've piloted this internally with a couple different business groups, and soon we're going to roll it out to the entire company, and it's obviously part of our product. So that's a bit about how FinOps applies in the data space. So Anne, back over to you for the rest of the stack.
All right, so in addition to the focusing on data, we also focus on the full stack for our applications. So I'll first start at the bottom with our infrastructure as a service. Now, AWS largely handles the physical deployment acts for deploying code to production. But it's up to our developers to select the right compute, select the right storage, and select the right networking for their applications. So in the compute and storage space, this is about right-sizing, picking exactly what you need in order for your application to run properly. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a very delicate balance. On the networking side, this is thinking about your data movement, your data transfer within the application, across applications, as well as thinking about your egress and how much you're being charged for all of that data movement. That needs to be optimized as well. This infrastructure as a service layer is where most FinOps teams focus. It's essentially at the bottom of the stack and is the first place folks look. Moving up the stack a bit, focusing on our platform as a service. Our engineers are largely responsible for selecting the right runtimes, the right middlewares, the right operating systems for their applications. What we focus on here is the telemetry that's coming out of these layers. The amount of data that is produced by telemetry is constantly increasing. So we have to be very intentional about the metrics that we are collecting so we aren't producing too much. The other piece of this is the observability layer of just seeing that telemetry. That matters a lot in terms of what you're able to view. Are you able to see the right things at the right time? And this is a layer that, if done properly, can really aid you on your cost journey because you can see exactly what you're looking for. However, if this is an area that is left unchecked, it can also be a major source of cost and kind of take you in the opposite way. And then finally, up the stack at the application layer, this is looking at what libraries are your applications using. Are they the most efficient libraries to get the job done? There's usually multiple options out there. So looking at how efficient is the application actually performing is really important. Also looking at how your application is balanced across your infrastructure. Making sure that it's balanced in the way that you expect, it's costing you what you expect is a key to success. But this is often a layer that folks don't look at because they're very focused on the bottom side of the stack, but looking at the complete stack is really the key to success for optimization. Now, I talk to a lot of folks external to Capital One about our FinOps journey, and the question that they all ask me is, how can we skip a lot of the lessons that you learned and get to where you are today? And my answer to that is usually, well, you can and you can't. There are some things that you will just need to learn. You will just need to learn about your organization, what works, also what doesn't work, so failure is good too, because it gives you an opportunity to change. But some of those things are going to be very specific to your organization. However, there are some things that we have learned along the way that I think folks can take advantage of now and not necessarily learn every step of the way. The first is investing in skill. FinOps is a skill. It is different than DevOps, although similar. It is different than traditional software engineering, although that is the foundation. But finding associates with FinOps skills is really important. We've invested in bringing folks in from the outside that have these skills. We've invested in folks internal to Capital One to train them on these skills and put that together to really create a high-performing team. Investing in skills is really important for FinOps, as well as all technology job functions. Next, we've created a culture of spend awareness. When Capital One was migrating to the cloud, as Patrick mentioned many years ago, it wasn't right time, right place for FinOps. Our priority needed to be on migrating to the cloud. In the last couple of years, it became right time, right place for FinOps, and we needed to create that culture of spend awareness. Talking about our cloud spend is just part of our DNA now. Now, it wasn't several years ago, but it is now because we've introduced it into all of our technology conversations. And then finally, we've been very intentional about creating KPIs that show that we are getting better. It's not all doom and gloom, oh, it's too much, you're overspending, over-provisioning, and so on. We are showing progress. We certainly aren't perfect. We have a ways to go. But it's important to show that we are achieving milestones and showing our teams that they are being successful with their changes that they are making. We've also created a little bit of a gamification aspect with this, which has been really great for our culture, and it helps teams a little bit from a morale and camaraderie standpoint to show that they are getting better, they are staying in budget, they are being efficient with their cloud spend, and it is turning into almost a bragging right, which is amazing. Essentially, it's becoming part of our culture and our DNA with cloud spend. So to wrap us up, there's just a few key takeaways. One, understand the needs of your users in your business. The exact recipe that worked for Capital One isn't going to be the exact recipe for every organization. There are pieces of it that should work, but really understand what matters to the organization, what motivates the organization, how do you celebrate within that organization. All of those pieces come together for your specific users and your business to create great things for FinOps.
When you are deciding how to empower your teams, enable your teams, which tools to use, like I said before, don't get caught up in the latest vendor selling a shiny object, a pretty UI. Remember what you're really doing at your core is enabling people to work differently. You're helping them transition to a world where they have to manage spend in a way that's foreign to them. You're operationalizing a new process. So look for tools that are going to enable your company to work the way that your company needs to work.
And then finally, measure what matters most. There is an incredible amount of various different data points that you could measure. Do they all matter? Absolutely not. They're interesting data points, but will they actually help you? Will they help you create change? Probably not. Think about for your organization what actually matters to you, what's going to motivate your teams, and measure that. Measure just a small subset of various different KPIs and anchor to those so they become your flagship metrics to show success over time. It's really important to celebrate that success. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you don't always want that hammer. But celebrate that success, create the momentum via what you are measuring. So that's all that we have for you today. I will say take the survey, but we do have a few minutes if anyone has any questions.